The year is 1861. The United States, a nation founded on principles of liberty and equality, finds itself on the precipice of a devastating internal conflict. The issue at the heart of this turmoil? Slavery. This deeply divisive institution had plagued the nation since its inception, casting a long shadow over its quest for a more perfect union. From the tobacco plantations of Virginia to the burgeoning cotton fields of the Deep South, slavery was the lifeblood of the Southern economy. Enslaved Africans, forcibly brought to American shores, toiled under brutal conditions, generating immense wealth for their white masters. This system of forced labor was not merely accepted in the South. It was deeply intertwined with its social fabric, its economic prosperity, and its very identity. The North, with its growing industrial cities and burgeoning factories, had largely moved away from slavery. Abolitionist movements gained momentum, fueled by passionate voices who condemned the moral abomination of human bondage. Newspapers like William Lloyd Garrison's and Frederick Douglass's exposed the horrors of slavery, igniting the conscience of the nation. The chasm between North and South deepened. The two sides, once bound by the fragile threads of compromise, now viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. This growing divide, fueled by the moral firestorm of slavery, would ultimately culminate in the bloodiest conflict in American history. Beyond the moral debate, the American Civil War was also a clash of economic systems. The North, with its bustling factories and diverse industries, represented the modernizing force of industrial capitalism. Its economy thrived on free labor, innovation, and a complex network of railroads and canals. The South, in contrast, remained tethered to an agrarian economy heavily reliant on slave labor. Cotton was king in the South. Vast plantations sprawled across the landscape, their fields white with the fluffy bolls that fueled the textile mills of New England and Europe. This dependence on a single crop made the Southern economy vulnerable, while the North enjoyed greater economic diversity. The South's reliance on slave labor further hindered its industrial development. With a large, unpaid workforce, there was little incentive to invest in labor-saving machinery or explore new technologies. The economic disparities between the two regions extended beyond production methods. The North, with its superior infrastructure and financial institutions, held a distinct advantage in terms of transportation, communication, and capital. The South, lacking significant industrial centers and investment capital, found itself increasingly reliant on the North for manufactured goods and financing. This economic imbalance bred resentment and fueled the South's sense of vulnerability, further deepening the divide between the two regions. As the nation grappled with the issue of slavery, the abolitionist movement gained momentum, challenging the very foundation of the Southern way of life. Abolitionists, driven by moral conviction, employed a variety of tactics to expose the horrors of slavery and advocate for its immediate end. They organized rallies and lectures, published newspapers and pamphlets, and aided fugitive slaves escaping to freedom via the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman, a former slave who risked her life repeatedly to guide others to freedom, became an iconic figure of resistance. Frederick Douglass, a powerful orator and writer, eloquently exposed the hypocrisy of a nation founded on liberty, yet perpetuating the enslavement of millions. These abolitionist voices, though often met with fierce opposition and violence, helped galvanize public opinion against slavery. Legislative measures further inflamed tensions between North and South. The Compromise of 1850, intended to quell the storm, only served to delay the inevitable. The Fugitive Slave Act, a key provision of the Compromise, incited outrage in the North by requiring citizens to assist in the capture of runaway slaves, even in free states. The Kansas-Nebraska Act, allowing for popular sovereignty to determine the fate of slavery in new territories, ignited violence and bloodshed in bleeding Kansas. Section 4. The Storm Breaks. 1860, Election and Secession. The year 1860 proved to be a pivotal turning point in American history. The presidential election of that year brought to the forefront the deep divisions that had been festering for decades. The newly formed Republican Party, staunchly opposed to the expansion of slavery, nominated Abraham Lincoln, a relatively unknown lawyer from Illinois, with a reputation for honesty and principle. The Democratic Party, fractured by internal divisions over slavery, split into two factions. Northern Democrats nominated Stephen Douglas, while Southern Democrats rallied behind John Breckinridge, a staunch defender of slavery. This division within the Democratic ranks paved the way for a Lincoln victory, though he carried none of the Southern states. Lincoln's election, viewed by many Southerners as a hostile takeover of the federal government, proved to be the final straw. Fearing that their way of life, their economic prosperity, and their very identity were under threat, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis, a former U.S. Senator from Mississippi, was elected as the Confederacy's first president. The nation, once united by the bonds of shared history and ideals, was now irrevocably broken. Section 5. Into the Maelstrom: Early Battles and Strategies. With the secession of the Southern states, the flames of war erupted. The first shots of the Civil War were fired at Fort Sumter in Charleston, South Carolina, on April 12, 1861, as Confederate forces bombarded the Union garrison. The attack on Fort Sumter galvanized both sides, igniting a conflagration that would consume the nation for the next 4 years. The North, with its larger population, greater industrial capacity, and more extensive railroad network, held a distinct advantage in a protracted war of attrition. The South, however, possessed a strong military tradition, a fiercely independent spirit, and the advantage of fighting on familiar ground. The early battles of the war exposed the naivete of both sides. Many believed that the conflict would be short-lived, a romantic adventure settled by a few decisive engagements. The reality proved to be far more brutal. The First Battle of Bull Run, fought in July 1861 near Manassas, Virginia, shattered any illusions of a swift Union victory. Confederate forces led by the audacious General Thomas Stonewall Jackson routed the Union Army, sending shockwaves through the North. Section 6. A Turning Tide, Emancipation and Shifting Fortunes. As the war dragged on, its purpose and meaning evolved. What began as a conflict to preserve the Union transformed into a moral crusade to end slavery. Abraham Lincoln, initially hesitant to alienate border states that allowed slavery, recognized that emancipation was not only a moral imperative but also a military necessity. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that all persons held as slaves within the rebellious states are, and henceforward shall be free. The proclamation, while limited in its immediate impact, held immense symbolic importance. It transformed the war from a struggle to preserve the Union into a fight for human freedom, rallying the support of abolitionists worldwide and galvanizing the spirit of enslaved African Americans. The tide of the war began to turn in favor of the Union. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought in July 1863, proved to be a turning point. Confederate forces led by General Robert E. Lee suffered a devastating defeat, effectively ending their hopes of invading the North. The Union victory at Vicksburg, Mississippi, on July 4, 1863, gave the North control of the Mississippi River, splitting the Confederacy in two. Section 7. Scars and Echoes, Reconstruction and the Enduring Legacy. After 4 long years of bloodshed and sacrifice, the Civil War finally came to an end in April 1865. The Confederacy, exhausted and depleted, surrendered to Union forces. The war left an indelible mark on the nation, its physical landscape scarred by battle, its people forever marked by the trauma of conflict. The period following the war, known as Reconstruction, presented its own set of challenges. The nation grappled with the monumental task of reintegrating the defeated South, rebuilding its shattered infrastructure, and addressing the legacy of slavery. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1865, abolished slavery, while the 14th and 15th Amendments granted citizenship and voting rights to African Americans. Reconstruction, however, proved to be a tumultuous and ultimately unsuccessful endeavor. Southern resistance to racial equality, coupled with the North's waning resolve, led to the rise of Jim Crow laws that enforced segregation and disenfranchisement. The promise of equality for African Americans, hard won on the battlefields of the Civil War, would remain unfulfilled for generations to come. The American Civil War, though a tragic chapter in the nation's history, left an enduring legacy. It ended the institution of slavery, reaffirmed the indissolubility of the Union, and expanded the meaning of democracy. The war's echoes can still be felt today in the ongoing struggle for racial justice and equality, a poignant reminder of the unfinished work of perfecting a nation forever marked by its past.